Chapter 4 of Robin Hood by J. Walker McSpadden. How Little John entered the Sheriff's service. List and hearken, gentlemen, all ye that now be here. Of Little John, that was knight's man, good mirth ye now shall hear. It had come around another fair day at Nottingham town, and folk crowded there by all the gates. Goods of many kinds were displayed in gaily colored booths, and at every cross street a free show was in progress. Here and there stages had been erected for the play at quarterstaff, a highly popular sport. There was a fellow, one Eric of Lincoln, who was thought to be the finest man with the staff for miles around. His feats were sung about in ballads through all the shire. A great boaster was he withal, and today he strutted about on one of these corner stages and vaunted his prowess, and offered to crack any man's crown for a shilling. Several had tried their skill with Eric, but he had soon sent them spinning in no gentle manner, amid the jeers and laughter of the onlookers. A beggar man sat over against Eric's stage and grinned every time a pate was cracked. He was an uncouth fellow, ragged and dirty and unshaven. Eric caught sight of his leering face at one of his boasts, for there was a lull in the game, because no man else wanted to come within reach of Eric's blows. Eric, I say, noticed the beggar man grinning at him rather impudently, and turned toward him sharply. "How now, you dirty villain," quoth he, "mend your manners to your betters, or, by Our Lady, I'll dust your rags for you." The beggar man still grinned. "I am always ready to mend my manners to my betters," said he, "but I am afraid you cannot teach me any better than you can dust my jacket." Come up," roared the other, flourishing his staff. "That I will," said the beggar, getting up slowly and with difficulty. "It will pleasure me hugely to take a braggart down a notch, and some good man will lend me a stout quarterstaff." At this a score of idlers reached him their staves, being ready enough to see another man have his head cracked, even if they wished to save their own, and he took the stoutest and heaviest of all. He made a sorry enough figure as he climbed awkwardly upon the stage, but when he had gained it, he towered full half a head above the other, for all his awkwardness. Natheless, he held his stick so clumsily that the crowd laughed in great glee. Now each man took his place and looked the other up and down, watching warily for an opening. Only a moment stood they thus, for Eric, intent on teaching this rash beggar a lesson and sweeping him speedily off the stage, launched forth boldly and gave the other a sounding crack on the shoulder. The beggar danced about and made as though he would drop his staff from very pain, while the crowd roared and Eric raised himself for another crushing blow. But just then the awkward beggar came to life. Straightening himself like a flash, he dealt Eric a backhanded blow, the like of which he had never before seen. Down went the boaster to the floor with a sounding thump, and the fickle people yelled and laughed themselves purple, for it was a new sight to see Eric of Lincoln eating dust. But he was up again almost as soon as he had fallen, and right quickly retreated to his own ringside to gather his wits and watch for an opening. He saw instantly that he had no easy antagonist, and he came in cautiously this time. And now those who stood around saw the merriest game of quarterstaff that was ever played inside the walls of Nottingham town. Both men were on their guard and fenced with fine skill, being well matched in prowess. Again and again did Eric seek to force an opening under the other's guard, and just as often were his blows parried. The beggar stood sturdily in his tracks, contenting himself with beating off the attack. For a long time their blows met like the steady crackling of some huge forest fire, and Eric strove to be wary, for he now knew that the other had no mean wits or mettle. But he grew right mad at last, and began to send down blows so fierce and fast that you would have sworn a great hailstorm was pounding on the shingles over your head. Yet he never so much as entered the tall beggar's guard. Then at last the stranger saw his chance and changed his tune of fighting. With one upward stroke he sent Eric's staff whirling through the air. With another he tapped Eric on the head, and with a third broad swing, ere the other could recover himself, he swept him clear off the stage, much as you would brush a fly off the window pane. Now the people danced and shouted and made so much ado that the shopkeepers left their stalls and others came running from every direction. The victory of the queer beggar made him immensely popular. Eric had been a great bully, and many had suffered defeat and insult at his hands. So the ragged stranger found money and food and drink everywhere at his disposal, and he feasted right comfortably till the afternoon. Then a longbow contest came on, and to it the beggar went with some of his new friends. It was held in the same arena that Robin had formerly entered, and again the sheriff and lords and ladies graced the scene with their presence, while the people crowded to their places. When the archers had stepped forward, the herald rose and proclaimed the rules of the game. How that each man should shoot 3 shots, and to him who shot the best, the prize of a yoke of fat steers should belong. A dozen keen-eyed bowmen were there, and among them some of the best fellows in the foresters' and sheriffs' companies. Down at the end of the line towered the tall beggar-man, who must needs twang a bowstring with the best of them. The sheriff noted his queer figure and asked, "Who is that ragged fellow?" "'Tis he that hath now so soundly cracked the crown of Eric of Lincoln," was the reply. The shooting presently began, and the targets soon showed a fine reckoning. Last of all came the beggar's turn. "By your leave," he said loudly, "I'd like it well to shoot with any other man here present at a mark of my own placing." And he strode down the lists with a slender peeled sapling which he stuck upright in the ground. "There," said he, "is a right good mark. Will any man try it?" But not an archer would risk his reputation on so small a target. Whereupon the beggar drew his bow with seeming carelessness and split the wand with his shaft. "Long live the beggar!" yelled the bystanders. The sheriff swore a full great oath and said, "This man is the best archer that ever yet I saw." And he beckoned to him and asked him, "How now, good fellow, what is your name, and in what country were you born?" "In Holderness I was born," the man replied. "Men call me Reinald Greenleaf." "You are a sturdy fellow, Reinald Greenleaf, and deserve better apparel than that you wear at present. Will you enter my service? I will give you 20 marks a year, above your living, and 3 good suits of clothes." "3 good suits, say you? Then right gladly will I enter your service, for my back has been bare this many a long day." Then Reinald turned him about to the crowd and shouted, "Hark ye, good people, I have entered the sheriff's service, and need not the yoke of steers for prize, so take them for yourselves, to feast withal." At this the crowd shouted more merrily than ever, and threw their caps high into the air. And none so popular a man had come to Nottingham town in many a long day as this same Reinhold Greenleaf. Now you may have guessed by this time who Reinhold Greenleaf really was, so I shall tell you that he was none other than Little John. And forth went he to the sheriff's house and entered his service. But it was a sorry day for the sheriff when he got his new man, for Little John winked his shrewd eye and said softly to himself, "By my faith, I shall be the worst servant to him that ever yet had he." 2 days passed by. Little John, it must be confessed, did not make a good servant. He insisted upon eating the sheriff's best bread and drinking his best wine, so that the steward waxed wroth. Nathless the sheriff held him in high esteem, and made great talk of taking him along on the next hunting trip. It was now the day of the banquet to the butchers, about which we have already heard. The banquet hall, you must know, was not in the main house, but connected with it by a corridor. All the servants were bustling about making preparations for the feast, save only Little John, who must needs lie abed the greater part of the day. But he presented himself at last, when the dinner was half over, and being desirous of seeing the guests for himself, he went into the hall with the other servants to pass the wine. First, however, I am afraid some of the wine passed his own lips while he went down the corridor. When he entered the banqueting hall, whom should he see but Robin Hood himself. We can imagine the start of surprise felt by each of these bold fellows upon seeing the other in such strange company. But they kept their secrets, as we have seen, and arranged to meet each other that same night. Meanwhile, the proud sheriff little knew that he harbored the 2 chief outlaws of the whole countryside beneath his roof. After the feast was over and night was beginning to advance, Little John felt faint of stomach and remembered him that he had eaten nothing all that day. Back went he to the pantry to see what eatables were laid by. But there, locking up the stores for the night, stood the fat steward. "Good Sir Steward," said Little John, "give me to dine, for it is long for Greenleaf to be fasting." The steward looked grimly at him and rattled the keys at his girdle. "Sirrah, lie abed," quoth he. "'Tis late in the day to be talking of eating. Since you have waited thus long to be hungry, you can e'en take your appetite back to bed again." "Now by mine appetite, that will I not do," cried Little John. "Your own paunch of fat would be enough for any bear to sleep on through the winter, but my stomach craves food, and food it shall have." Saying this, he brushed past the steward and tried the door, but it was locked fast. Whereat the fat steward chuckled and jangled his keys again. Then was Little John right mad, and brought down his huge fist on the door panel with a sledge-hammer blow that shivered an opening you could thrust your hand into. Little John stooped and peered through the hole to see what food lay within reach, when crack went the steward's keys upon his crown, and the worthy danced around him playing a tattoo that made Little John's ears ring. At this he turned upon the steward and gave him such a rap that his back went nigh in two, and over went the fat fellow rolling on the floor. "Lie there," quoth Little John, "till ye find strength to go to bed. Meanwhile I must be about my dinner." And he kicked open the buttery door without ceremony, and brought to light a venison pasty and cold roast pheasant, goodly sights to a hungry man. Placing these down on a convenient shelf, he fell to with right good will. So Little John ate and drank as much as he would. Now the Sheriff had in his kitchen a cook, a stout man and bold, who heard the rumpus and came in to see how the land lay. There sat Little John eating away for dear life, while the fat steward was rolled under the table like a bundle of rags. "I make my vow," said the cook, "you are a shrewd hind to dwell thus in a household and ask thus to dine." So saying, he laid aside his spit and drew a good sword that hung at his side. "I make my vow," said Little John, "you are a bold man and hardy to come thus between me and my meat. So defend yourself and see that you prove the better man." And he drew his own sword and crossed weapons with the cook. Then back and forth they clashed with sullen sound. The old ballad, which tells of their fight, says that they thought nothing for to flee, but stiffly for to stand. There they fought sore together, 2 miles away and more, but neither might the other harm, for the space of a full hour. "I make my vow," cried Little John, "you are the best swordsman that ever yet I saw. What say you to resting a space, and eating and drinking good health with me? Then we may fall to again with the swords." "Agreed," said the cook, who loved good fare as well as a good fight, and they both laid by their swords and fell to the food with hearty will. The venison pasty soon disappeared, and the roast pheasant flew at as lively a rate as ever the bird itself had sped. Then the warriors rested a space and patted their stomachs, and smiled across at each other like bosom friends. For a man, when he has dined, looks out pleasantly upon the world. "And now, Reynold Greenleaf," said the cook, "we may as well settle this brave fight we have in hand." "A true saying," rejoined the other. "But first tell me, friend, for I protest you are my friend henceforth, what is the score we have to settle?" "Naught save who can handle the sword best," said the cook. "By my troth, I had thought to carve you like a capon ere now." "And I had long since thought to shave your ears," replied Little John. "This bout we can settle in right good time. But just now I and my master have need of you, and you can turn your stout blade to better service than that of the Sheriff." "Whose service would that be?" asked the cook. "Mine," answered a would-be butcher entering the room, "and I am Robin Hood." So ends Chapter 4. Chapter 5. How the Sheriff lost 3 good servants and found them again. "Make good cheer," said Robin Hood, "Sheriff, for charity, and for the love of Little John, thy life is granted thee." The cook gasped in amazement. "This Robin Hood, and under the Sheriff's very roof!" "Now, by my troth, you are a brave fellow," he said. "I have heard great tales of your prowess, and the half has not been told. But who might this tall slasher be?" "Men do call me Little John, good fellow." "Then, Little John, or Reynold Greenleaf, I like you well, on my honor as much the miller's son. And you too, bold Robin Hood, an you take me, I will enter your service right gladly." "Spoken like a stout man," said Robin, seizing him by the hand, "but I must back to my own bed, lest some sleepy warden stumble upon me, and I be forced to run him through. Lucky for you twain that wine flowed so freely in the house today, else the noise of your combat would have brought other onlookers besides Robin Hood. Now, if ye would flee the house tonight, I will join you in the good greenwood tomorrow." "But, good master," said the cook, "you would not stay here overnight. Verily, it is running your head into a noose. Come with us. The sheriff has set strict watch on all the gates, since 'tis fair week, but I know the warden at the west gate and could bring us through safely. Tomorrow you will be stayed." "Nay, that I will not," laughed Robin, "for I shall go through with no less escort than the sheriff himself. Now do you, Little John, and do you, Much the miller's son, go right speedily. In the borders of the wood you will find my merry men. Tell them to kill 2 fine harts against tomorrow eve, for we shall have great company and lordly sport." And Robin left them as suddenly as he had come. "Comrade," then said Little John, "we may as well bid the sheriff's roof farewell. But ere we go, it would seem a true pity to fail to take such of the sheriff's silver plate as will cause us to remember him, and also grace our special feasts." "'Tis well said indeed," quoth the cook. Thereupon they got a great sack and filled it with silver plate from the shelves where it would not at once be missed, and they swung the sack between them, and away they went, out of the house, out of the town, and into the friendly shelter of Sherwood Forest. The next morning the servants were late astir in the sheriff's house. The steward awoke from a heavy sleep, but his cracked head was still in such a whirl that he could not have sworn whether the sheriff had ever owned so much as one silver dish. So the theft went undiscovered for the nonce. Robin Hood met the sheriff at breakfast, when his host soon spoke of what was uppermost in his heart, the purchase of the fine herd of cattle near Gamewell. 'Twas clear that a vision of them, purchased for 20 paltry gold pieces, had been with him all through the night in his dreams. And Robin again appeared such a silly fellow that the sheriff saw no need of dissembling, but said that he was ready to start at once to look at the herd. Accordingly they set forth, Robin in his little butcher's cart behind the lean mare, and the sheriff mounted on a horse. Out of Nottingham town, through gates open wide, they proceeded and took the hill road leading through Sherwood Forest. And as they went on and plunged deeper among the trees, Robin whistled blithely and sang snatches of tunes. "Why are you so gay, fellow?" said the sheriff, for, sooth to say, the silence of the woods was making him uneasy. "I am whistling to keep my courage up," replied Robin. "What is there to fear when you have the Sheriff of Nottingham beside you?" quoth the other pompously. Robin scratched his head. "They do say that Robin Hood and his men care little for the sheriff," he said. "Pooh!" said the sheriff. "I would not give that for their lives, if I could once lay hands upon them," and he snapped his fingers angrily. "But Robin Hood himself was on this very road the last time I came to town," said the other. The sheriff started at the crackling of a twig under his horse's foot and looked around. "Did you see him?" he asked. "Aye, that did I. He wanted the use of this mare and cart to drive to Nottingham. He said he would fain turn butcher. But see!" As he spoke he came to a turn in the road, and there before them stood a herd of the King's deer, feeding. Robin pointed to them and continued, "There is my herd of cattle, good Master Sheriff. How do you like them? Are they not fat and fair to see?" The sheriff drew rein quickly. "Now, fellow," quoth he, "I would I were well out of this forest, for I care not to see such herds as these, or such faces as yours. Choose your own way, therefore, whoever you be, and let me go mine." "Nay," laughed Robin, seizing the sheriff's bridle. "I have been at too much pains to cultivate your company to forego it now so easily. Besides, I wish you to meet some of my friends and dine with me, since you have so lately entertained me at your board." So saying, he clapped a horn on his lips and winded 3 merry notes. The deer bounded away, and before the last of them was seen there came a running and a rustling, and out from behind covert and tree came full 20 of men, clad in Lincoln green, and bearing gold yew bows in their hands and short swords at their sides. Up they ran to Robin and doffed their caps to him respectfully, while the sheriff sat still from very amazement. "Welcome to the greenwood," said one of the leaders, bending the knee with mock reverence before the sheriff. The sheriff glared. It was Little John. "Woe the worth, Reynold Greenleaf," he said. "You have betrayed me." "I make my vow," said Little John, "that you are to blame, master. I was misserved of my dinner when I was at your house, but we shall set you down to a feast we hope you will enjoy." "Well spoken, Little John," said Robin Hood. "Take you his bridle and let us do honor to the guest who has come to feast with us." Then turning abruptly, the whole company plunged into the heart of the forest. After twisting and turning till the sheriff's bewildered head sat dizzily upon his shoulders, the greenwood men passed through a narrow alley amid the trees which led to a goodly open space, flanked by wide spreading oaks. Under the largest of these a pleasant fire was crackling, and near it two fine hearths lay ready for cooking. Around the blaze were gathered another company of yeomen quite as large as that which came with Robin Hood. Up sprang they as the latter advanced and saluted their leader with deference, but with hearty gladness to see him back again. That merry wag Will Stuteley was in command, and when he saw the pale-faced sheriff being led in like any culprit, he took his cloak and laid it humbly upon the ground and besought the sheriff to alight upon it, as the ground of Sherwood was unused to such dignitaries. "Bestir yourselves, good fellows," cried Robin Hood, "and while our new cook, whom I see with us, is preparing a feast worthy of our high guest, let us have a few games to do him honor." Then while the whole glade was filled with the savory smell of roasting venison and fat capons, and brown pastries warmed beside the blaze, and mulled wine sent forth a cordial fragrance, Robin Hood placed the sheriff upon a knoll beneath the largest oak and sat himself down by him. First stepped forward several pairs of men armed with the quarterstaff, the widow's sons among them, and so skillfully did they thrust and parry and beat down guards that the sheriff, who loved a good game as well as any man, clapped his hands, forgetting where he was, and shouted, "Well struck! Well struck! Never have I seen such blows at all the fairs of Nottingham." Then the best archers of the band set up a small wand at 80 paces distant, and thereon they affixed a wreath of green. And the archers began to shoot, and he who shot not through the garland without disturbing its leaves and tendrils was fain to submit to a good sound buffet from Little John. But right cunning was the shooting, for the men had spent a certain time in daily practice, and many were the shafts which sped daintily through the circle. Nathless now and again some luckless fellow would shoot awry and would be sent winding from a long-armed blow from the tall lieutenant while the glade roared with laughter. And none more hearty a guffaw was given than came from the sheriff's own throat, for the spirit of the greenwood was upon him. But presently his high mood was dashed. The company sat down to meat, and the guest was treated to two more disturbing surprise. The cook came forward to serve the food, when the sheriff beheld in him his own former servant and one whom he supposed was at the moment in the scullery at Nottingham. Much, the miller's son, grinned by way of answer to the sheriff's amazement, and served the plates and placed them before the party. Then did the sheriff gasp and fairly choke with rage. The service was his own silverware from the mansion house. "You rascals, you rogues," he sputtered. "Was it not enough to defraud me out of 3 of my servants, that you must also rob me of my best silver service? Nay, by my life, but I will not touch your food." But Robin Hood bade him pause. "Gramercy," quoth he, "servants come and go in merry England, as so does service. The platters are but used to do your worship honor, and as for your life, it is forfeit to your eagerness to buy my herd of cattle so cheaply. Now sit you down again, and make good cheer, Sheriff, for charity, and for the love of Little John your life is granted you." So the Sheriff sat him down again, with the best face he could assume, and soon the cook's viands were disappearing down his gullet as rapidly as the next man's. And they feasted royally and clinked each other's cups until the sun had ceased to print the pattern of the leaves upon the forest carpet. Then the Sheriff arose and said, "I thank you, Robin Hood, one-time butcher, and you, Little John, one-time beggar, and you, Much, one-time cook, and all you good men who have entertained me in Sherwood so well. Promises I make not as to how I shall requite you when next you come to Nottingham, for I am in the King's service. So for the present the score rests with you. But the shadows grow long, and I must away, if you will be pleased to pilot me to the road." Then Robin Hood and all his men arose and drank the Sheriff's health, and Robin said, "If you must needs go at once, we will not detain you, except that you have forgotten two things." "What may they be?" asked the Sheriff, while his heart sank within him. "You forgot that you came with me today to buy a herd of horned beasts. Likewise, that he who dines at the Greenwood Inn must pay the landlord." The Sheriff fidgeted like a small boy who has forgotten his lesson. "Nay, I have but a small sum with me," he began apologetically. "What is that sum, gossip?" questioned Little John, "for my own wage should also come out of it." "And mine," said Much. "And mine," smiled Robin. The Sheriff caught his breath. "By my troth, are all these silver dishes worth anything?" The outlaws roared heartily at this. "I'll tell you what it is, worship," said Robin. "We three rascally servants will compound our back wages for those plates, and we will keep the herd of cattle free for our own use, and the King's. But this little tavern bill should be settled. Now, what sum have you about you?" "I have only those 20 pieces of gold and 20 others," said the Sheriff, and well it was that he told the truth for once, for Robin said, "Count it, Little John." Little John turned the Sheriff's wallet inside out. "'Tis true enough," he said. "Then you shall pay no more than 20 pieces for your entertainment, excellence," decreed Robin. "Speak I soothly, men of Greenwood?" "Good!" echoed the others. "The Sheriff should swear by his patron saint that he will not molest us," said Will Stuteley, and his addition was carried unanimously. "So be it, then," cried Little John, approaching the Sheriff. "Now swear by your life and your patron saint." "I will swear it by St. George, who is patron of us all," said the Sheriff vigorously, "that I will never disturb or distress the outlaws in Sherwood. But let me catch any of you out of Sherwood," thought he to himself. Then the 20 pieces of gold were paid over, and the Sheriff once more prepared to depart. "Never had we so worshipful a guest before," said Robin, "and as the new moon is beginning to silver the leaves, I shall bear you company myself for part of the way. 'Twas I who brought you into the wood." "Nay, I protest against your going needlessly far," said Sheriff. "But I protest that I am loath to lose your company," replied Robin. "The next time I may not be so pleased." And he took the Sheriff's horse by the bridle rein and led him through the lane and by many a thicket till the main road was reached. "Now fare you well, good Sheriff," he said, "and when next you think to despoil a poor prodigal, remember the herd you would have bought over against Gamewell, and when next you employ a servant, make certain that he is not employing you." So saying, he smote the nag's haunch, and off went the Sheriff upon the road to Nottingham. And that is how, you will find from many ballads that came to be sung at the Sheriff's expense, and which are known even to the present day, that, I say, is how the Sheriff lost 3 good servants and found them again. So ends Chapter 5. Chapter 6 of Robin Hood. How Robin Hood met Will Scarlet. The youngster was clothed in scarlet red, in scarlet fine and gay, and he did frisk it o'er the plain, and chanted a roundelay. One fine morning, soon after the proud Sheriff had been brought to grief, Robin Hood and Little John went strolling down a path through the wood. It was not far from the footbridge where they had fought their memorable battle, and by common impulse they directed their steps to the brook to quench their thirst and rest them in the cool bushes. The morning gave promise of a hot day. The road even by the brook was dusty, so the cooling stream was very pleasing and grateful to their senses. On each side of them, beyond the dusty highway, stretched out broad fields of tender young corn, and on yon side of the fields uprose the sturdy oaks and beeches and ashes of the forest, while at their feet modest violets peeped out shyly and greeted the loiterers with an odor which made the heart glad. Over on the far side of the brook, in a tiny bay, floated 3 lily pads, and from amid some clover blossoms on the bank an industrious bee rose with the hum of busy contentment. It was a day, so brimful of quiet joy that the two friends lay flat on their backs, gazing up at the scurrying clouds, and neither caring to break the silence. Presently they heard someone coming up the road whistling gaily, as though he owned the whole world and was but made to whistle in. Anon he chanted a roundelay with a merry note. "By my troth, a gay bird," quoth Robin, raising up on his elbow. "Let us lie still and trust that his purse is not as light as his heart." So they lay still, and in a minute more came a smart stranger dressed in scarlet and silk and wearing a jaunty hat with a curling cock feather in it. His whole costume was of scarlet, from the feather to the silk hosen on his legs. A goodly sword hung at his side, its scabbard all embossed with tilting knights and weeping ladies. His hair was long and yellow, and hung clustering about his shoulders, for all the world like a schoolgirl's, and he bore himself with as mincing a gait as the pertest of them. Little John clucked his teeth drolly at this sight. "By my troth, a gay bird," he said, echoing the other's words, then added, "but not so bad a build for all his prettiness. Look you, those calves and thighs are well rounded and straight. The arms, for all that gold-wrought cloak, hang stoutly from full shoulders. I warrant you the fop can use his dainty sword right well on occasion." "Nay," retorted Robin, "he is naught but a lady's man from court. My longbow 'gainst a plugged shilling, that he would run and bellow lustily at sight of a quarterstaff. Stay you behind this bush, and I will soon get some rare sport out of him. Belike his silk purse may contain more pennies than the law allows to one man in Sherwood or Barnesdale." So saying, Robin Hood stepped forth briskly from the covert and planted himself in the way of the scarlet stranger. The latter had walked so slowly that he was scarce come to their resting place, and now, on beholding Robin, he neither slackened nor quickened his pace, but sauntered idly straight ahead, looking to the right and to the left with the finest air in the world, but never once at Robin. "Hold," quoth the outlaw. "What mean ye by running thus over a wayfarer, roughshod?" "Wherefore should I hold, good fellow?" said the stranger in a smooth voice, and looking at Robin for the first time. "Because I bid you to," replied Robin. "And who may you be?" asked the other as coolly as you please. "What my name is matters not," said Robin, "but know that I am a public tax-gatherer and equalizer of shillings. If your purse have more than a just number of shillings or pence, I must e'en lighten it somewhat, for there are many worthy people round about these borders who have less than the just amount. Wherefore, sweet gentlemen, I pray you hand over your purse without more ado, that I may judge of its weight in proper fashion." The other smiled as sweetly as though a lady were paying him a compliment. "You are a droll fellow," he said calmly. "Your speech amuses me mightily. Pray continue, if you have not done, for I am in no hurry this morning." "I have said all with my tongue that is needful," retorted Robin, beginning to grow red under the collar. "Nathless, I have other arguments which may not be so pleasing to your dainty skin. Prithee, stand and deliver. I promise to deal fairly with the purse." "Alack a day," said the stranger with a shrug of his shoulders. "I am deeply sorrowful that I cannot show my purse to every rough lout that asks to see it. But I really could not, as I have further need of it myself and every farthing it contains. Wherefore, pray stand aside." "Nay, that I will not, and 'twill go the harder with you if you do not yield at once." "Good fellow," said the other gently, "have I not heard all your speech with patience? Now that is all I promised to do. My conscience is salved, and I must go on my way." "To roll-a-roly-loo," he caroled, making as though to depart. "Hold, I say," quoth Robin hotly, for he knew how Little John must be chuckling at this from behind the bushes. "Hold, I say, else I shall have to bloody those fair locks of yours," and he swung his quarterstaff threateningly. "Alas!" moaned the stranger, shaking his head, "the pity of it all. Now I shall have to run this fellow through with my sword, and I hope to be a peaceable man henceforth." And sighing deeply he drew his shining blade and stood on guard. "Put by your weapon," said Robin. "It is too pretty a piece of steel to get cracked with common oak cudgel, and that is what would happen on the first pass I made at you. Get you a stick like mine out of yon undergrowth, and we will fight fairly, man to man." The stranger thought a moment with his usual slowness, and eyed Robin from head to foot. Then he unbuckled his scabbard, laid it and the sword aside, and walked deliberately over to the oak thicket. Choosing from among the shoots and saplings, he found a stout little tree to his liking, when he laid hold of it, without stopping to cut it, and gave a tug. Up it came, root and all, as though it were a stalk of corn, and the stranger walked back trimming it as quietly as though pulling up trees were the easiest thing in the world. Little John from his hiding place saw this feat, and could hardly restrain a long whistle. "By Our Lady," he muttered to himself, "I would not be in Master Robin's boots." Whatever Robin thought upon seeing the stranger's strength, he uttered not a word and budged not an inch. He only put his oak staff at parry as the other took his stand. There was a threefold surprise that day by the brookside. The stranger and Robin and Little John in the bushes all found a combat that upset all reckoning. The stranger, for all his easy strength and cool nerve, found an antagonist who met his blows with the skill of a woodman. Robin found the stranger as hard to hit as though fenced in by an oak hedge, while Little John rolled over and over in silent joy. Back and forth swayed the fighters, their cudgels pounding this way and that, knocking off splinters and bark, and threatening direst damage to bone and muscle and skin. Back and forth they pranced, kicking up a cloud of dust, and gasping for fresh air. From a little way off you would have vowed that these two men were trying to put out a fire, so thickly hung the cloud of battle over them. Thrice did Robin smite the scarlet man, with such blows that a less stout fellow must have bowled over. Only twice did the scarlet man smite Robin, but the second blow was like to finish him. The first had been delivered over the knuckles, and though 'twas a glancing stroke, it well nigh broke Robin's fingers, so that he could not easily raise his staff again. And while he was dancing about in pain and muttering a dust-covered oath, the other staff came swinging through the cloud at one side, zip, and struck him under the arm. Down went Robin, as though he were a ninepin, flat down into the dust of the road. But despite the pain he was bounding up again like an Indian rubber man to renew the attack, when Little John interfered. "Hold!" said he, bursting out of the bushes and seizing the stranger's weapon. "Hold, I say!" "Nay," retorted the stranger quietly, "I was not offering to smite him while he was down, but if there be a whole nest of you hatching here by the waterside, cluck out the other chicks, and I'll make shift to fight them all." "Not for all the deer in Sherwood," cried Robin. "You are a good fellow and a gentleman. I'll fight no more with you, for verily I feel sore in wrist and body, nor shall any of mine molest you henceforth." Sooth to say, Robin did not look in good fighting trim. His clothes were coated with dirt. One of his hosen had slipped halfway down from his knee, the sleeve of his jerkin was split, and his face was streaked with sweat and dirt. Little John eyed him drewly. "How now, good master," quoth he, "the sport you were to kick up has left you in sorry plight. Let me dust your coat for you." "Marry, it has been dusted enough already," replied Robin, "and I now believe the Scripture saying that all men are but dust, for it has sifted me through and lined my gullet an inch deep. By your leave." And he went to the brookside and drank deep and laved his face and hands. All this while the stranger had been eyeing Robin attentively and listening to his voice as though striving to recall it. "If I mistake not," he said slowly at last, "you are that famous outlaw, Robin Hood of Barnesdale." "You say right," replied Robin, "but my fame has been tumbling sadly about in the dust to-day." "Now why did I not know you at once?" continued the stranger. "This battle need not have happened, for I came abroad to find you to-day, and thought to have remembered your face and speech. Know you not me, Rob, my lad? Hast ever been to Gamewell Lodge?" "Ha! Will Gamewell, my dear old chum, Will Gamewell!" shouted Robin, throwing his arms about the other in sheer affection. "What an ass I was not to recognize you! But it has been years since we parted, and your gentle schooling has polished you off mightily." Will embraced his cousin no less heartily. "We are quits on not knowing kinsmen," he said, for you have changed and strengthened much from the stripling with whom I used to run foot races in old Sherwood." "But why seek you me?" asked Robin. "You know I am an outlaw and dangerous company. And how left you mine uncle? And have you heard aught of late of Maid Marian?" "Your last question first," answered Will, laughing, "for I perceive that it lies nearest your heart. I saw Maid Marian not many weeks after the great shooting at Nottingham, when you won her the golden arrow. She prizes the bauble among her dearest possessions, though it has made her an enemy in the Sheriff's proud daughter. Maid Marian bade me tell you, if I ever saw you, that she must return to Queen Eleanor's court, but she could never forget the happy days in the greenwood. As for the old squire, he is still hale and hearty, though rheumatic withal. He speaks of you as a sad young dog, but for all that is secretly proud of your skill at the bow and of the way you are pestering the Sheriff, whom he likes not. 'Twas for my father's sake that I am now in the open, an outlaw like yourself. He has had a steward, a surly fellow enough, who, while I was away at school, bootlicked his way to favor until he lorded it over the whole house. Then he grew right saucy and impudent, but my father minded it not, deeming the fellow indispensable in managing the estate. But when I came back it irked me sorely to see the fellow strut about as though he owned the place. He was sly enough with me at first, and would browbeat the squire only when I was out of earshot. It chanced one day, however, that I heard loud voices through an open window, and paused to hearken. That vile servant called my father a meddling old fool. "Fool and meddler art thou thyself, varlet," I shouted, springing through the window. "That for thy impudence!" And in my heat I smote him a blow mightier than I intended, for I have some strength in mine arm. The fellow rolled over and never breathed afterwards. I think I broke his neck, or something the like. Then I knew that the Sheriff would use this as a pretext to hound my father if I tarried, so I bade the squire farewell and told him I would seek you in Sherwood. "Now, by my halidome," said Robin Hood, "for a man escaping the law, you took it about as coolly as one could wish. To see you come tripping along, decked out in all your gay plumage, and trolling forth a roundelay, one would think you had not a care in all the world. Indeed, I remarked to Little John here that I hoped your purse was not as light as your heart." "Belike you meant head," laughed Will. "And is this Little John the Great? Shake hands with me an you will, and promise me to cross the staff with me in friendly bout some day in the forest." "That will I," quoth Little John heartily. "Here's my hand on it. What is your last name again, say you?" "'Tis to be changed," interposed Robin. "Then shall the men armed with warrants go hang for all of us. Let me bethink myself. Ah, I have it. In scarlet he came to us, and that shall be his name henceforth. Welcome to the greenwood, Will Scarlet." "Aye, welcome, Will Scarlet," said Little John, and they all clasped hands again, and swore to be true each to the other and to Robin Hood's men in Sherwood Forest. So ends chapter 6. Chapter 7. How Robin Hood met Friar Tuck. The friar took Robin Hood on his back, deep water he did bestride, and spake neither good word nor bad, till he came at the other side. In the summer time, when leaves grow green and flowers are fresh and gay, Robin Hood and his merry men were all disposed to play. Thus runs a quaint old ballad which begins the next adventure. Then some would leap, and some would run, and some try archery, and some ply the quarterstaff, and some fall to with the good broadsword. Some again would try a round at buffet and fisticuff, and thus, by every variety of sport and exercise, they perfected themselves in skill and made the band and its prowess well known throughout all England. It had been a custom of Robin Hood's to pick out the best men in all the countryside. Whenever he heard of one more than usually skilled in any feat of arms, he would seek the man and test him in personal encounter, which did not always end happily for Robin, and when he found a man to his liking, he offered him service with the bold fellows of Sherwood Forest. Thus it came about that one day, after a practice at shooting, in which Little John struck down a hart at 500 feet distance, Robin Hood was vain to boast. "God's blessing on your heart," he cried, clapping the burly fellow on the shoulder. I would travel 100 miles to find one who could match you." At this Will Scarlet laughed full roundly. "There lives a curtal friar in Fountain's Abbey, Tuck by name, who can beat both him and you," he said. Robin pricked up his ears at this free speech. "By Our Lady," he said, "I'll neither eat nor drink till I see this same friar." And with his usual impetuosity he at once set about arming himself for the adventure. On his head he placed a cap of steel. Underneath his Lincoln green he wore a coat of chain metal. Then with sword and buckler girded at his side he made a goodly show. But he also took with him his stout yew bow and a sheaf of chosen arrows. So he set forth upon his way with blithe heart, for it was a day when the whole face of the earth seemed glad and rejoicing in pulsing life. Steadily he pressed forward by winding ways till he came to a green broad pasture land at whose edge flowed a stream dipping in and out among the willows and rushes on the banks. A pleasant stream it was, but it flowed calmly as though of some depth in the middle. Robin did not fancy getting his feet wet, or his fine suit of mail rusted, so he paused on the hither bank to rest and take his bearings. As he sat down quietly under the shade of a drooping willow, he heard snatches of a jovial song floating to him from the farther side. Then came a sound of two men's voices arguing. One was upholding the merits of hasty pudding, and the other stood out stoutly for meat pie. "Especially," quoth this one, "when flavored with young onions." "Gramercy," muttered Robin to himself, "that is a tantalizing speech to a hungry man. But, odds bodkins, did ever two men talk more alike than those two fellows yonder?" In truth, Robin could well marvel at the speech, for the voices were curiously alike. Presently the willows parted on the other bank, and Robin could hardly forbear laughing outright. His mystery was explained. It was not two men who had done all this singing and talking, but one, and that one a stout curtal friar who wore a long cloak over his portly frame, tied with a cord in the middle. On his head was a knight's helmet, and in his hand was a no more warlike weapon than a huge pasty pie, with which he sat down by the water's edge. His twofold argument was finished. The meat pie had triumphed, and no wonder, for it was the present witness, soon to give its own testimony. But first the friar took off his helmet to cool his head, and a droll picture he made. His head was as round as an apple, and eke as smooth in spots. A fringe of close curling black hair grew round the base of his skull, but his crown was bare and shiny as an egg. His cheeks also were smooth and red and shiny, and his little gray eyes danced about with the funniest air imaginable. You would not have blamed Robin Hood for wanting to laugh, had you heard this serious, two-faced talk, and then seen this jovial, one-faced man. Good humor and fat living stood out all over him, yet for all that he looked stout enough and able to take care of himself with any man. His short neck was thick like that of a Berkshire bull, his shoulders were set far back, and his arms sprouted therefrom like two oak limbs. As he sat him down, the cloak fell apart, disclosing a sword and buckler as stout as Robin's own. Natheless, Robin was not dismayed at sight of the weapons. Instead, his heart fell within him when he saw the meat pie, which was now in fair way to be devoured before his very eyes. For the friar lost no time in thrusting one hand deep into the pie, while he crossed himself with the other. Thereupon Robin seized his bow and fitted a shaft. "Hey, friar," he sang out, "carry me over the water, or else I cannot answer for your safety." The other started at the unexpected greeting, and laid his hand upon his sword. Then he looked up and beheld Robin's arrow pointing full upon him. "Put down your bow, fellow," he shouted back, "and I will bring you over the brook. 'Tis our duty in life to help each other, and your keen shaft shows me that you are a man worthy of some attention." So the friar knight got him up gravely, though his eyes twinkled with a cunning light, and laid aside his beloved pie, and his cloak, and his sword and buckler, and waded across the stream with waddling dignity. Then he took Robin Hood upon his back, and spoke neither good word nor bad till he came to the other side. Lightly leaped Robin off his back, and said, "I am much beholden to you, good father." "Beholden, say you? rejoined the other, drawing his sword. "Then by my faith you shall even repay your score. Now mine own affairs, which are of a spiritual kind and much more important than yours, which are carnal, lie on the other side of this stream. I see that you are a likely man and one, moreover, who would not refuse to serve the church. I must therefore pray of you that whatsoever I have done unto you, you will also do unto me. In short, my son, you must e'en carry me back again." Courteously enough was this said, but so suddenly had the friar drawn his sword that Robin had no time to unsling his bow from his back, whither he had placed it to avoid getting it wet, or to unfasten his scabbard, so he was fain to temporize. "Nay, good father, but I shall get my feet wet," he commenced. "Are your feet any better than mine?" retorted the other. "I fear now that I have already wetted myself so sadly as to lay in a store of rheumatic pains by way of penance." "I am not so strong as you," continued Robin, "that helmet and sword and buckler would be my undoing on an uncertain footing amidstream, to say nothing of your holy flesh and bones." "Then I will lighten up somewhat," replied the other calmly. "Promise to carry me across, and I will lay aside my war gear." "Agreed," said Robin, and the friar thereupon stripped himself, and Robin bent his stout back and took him up even as he had promised. Now the stones at the bottom of the stream were round and slippery, and the current swept along strongly, waist deep in the middle. Moreover, Robin had a heavier load than the other had borne, nor did he know the ford. So he went stumbling along now, stepping into a deep hole, now stumbling over a boulder in a manner that threatened to unseat his rider or plunge them both clear under current. But the fat friar hung on and dug his heels into his steed's ribs in as gallant manner as if he were riding in a tournament, while as for poor Robin, the sweat ran down him in torrents and he gasped like the winded horse he was. But at last he managed to stagger out on the bank and deposit his unwieldy load. No sooner had he sat the friar down than he seized his own sword. "Now, holy friar," quoth he, panting and wiping the sweat from his brow, "what say the Scriptures that you quote so glibly? Be not weary of well doing. You must carry me back again, or I swear that I will make a cheesecloth out of your jacket." The friar's gray eyes once more twinkled with a cunning gleam that boded no good to Robin, but his voice was as calm and courteous as ever. "Your wits are keen, my son," he said, "and I see that the waters of the stream have not quenched your spirit. Once more will I bend my back to the oppressor and carry the weight of the haughty." So Robin mounted again in high glee, and carried his sword in his hand and went prepared to tarry upon the other side. But while he was bethinking himself what great words to use when he should arrive thither, he felt himself slipping from the friar's broad back. He clutched frantically to save himself, but had too round a surface to grasp, besides being hampered by his weapon. So down went he with a loud splash into the middle of the stream, where the crafty friar had conveyed him. "There," quoth the holy man, choose you, my fine fellow, whether you will sink or swim." And he gained his own bank without more ado, while Robin thrashed and spluttered about until he made shift to grasp a willow wand and thus haul himself ashore on the other side. Then Robin's rage waxed furious, despite his wetting, and he took his bow and arrows and let fly one shaft after another at the worthy friar, but they rattled harmlessly off his steel buckler, while he laughed and minded them no more than if they had been hailstones. Shoot on, good fellow," he sang out. "Shoot as you have begun. If you shoot here a summer's day, your mark I will not shun." So Robin shot, and passing well, till all his arrows were gone, when from very rage he began to revile him. "You bloody villain," shouted he, "you psalm-singing hypocrite, you reviler of good hasty pudding, come but within reach of my sword arm, and, friar or no friar, I'll shave your tonsure closer than ever bald-pated monk was shaven before." "Soft you and fair," said the friar unconcernedly. "Hard words are cheap, and you may need your wind presently. And you would like a bout with swords, meet me halfway in the stream." And with this speech the friar waded into the brook, sword in hand, where he was met halfway by the impetuous outlaw. Thereupon began a fierce and mighty battle. Up and down, in and out, back and forth they fought. The swords flashed in the rays of the declining sun and then met with a clash that would have shivered less sturdy weapons or disarmed less sturdy wielders. Many a smart blow was landed, but each perceived that the other wore an undercoat of linked mail which might not be pierced. Natheless, their ribs ached at the force of the blows. Once and again they paused by mutual consent and caught breath and looked hard each at the other, for never had either met so stout a fellow. Finally, in a furious onslaught of lunge and parry, Robin's foot stepped on a rolling stone and he went down upon his knees. But his antagonist would not take this advantage. He paused until Robin should get upon his feet. "Now, by Our Lady," cried the outlaw, using his favorite oath, "you are the fairest swordsman that I have met in many a long day. I would beg a boon of you." "What is it?" said the other. "Give me leave to set my horn to my mouth and blow 3 blasts thereon." "That will I do," said the curtall friar. "Blow till your breath fails, an it please you." Then, says the old ballad, Robin Hood set his horn to mouth and blew mighty blasts, and 100 yeomen, bows bent, came raking over the lea. "Whose men are these," said the friar, "that come so hastily?" "These men are mine," said Robin Hood, feeling that his time to laugh was come at last. Then said the friar in his turn, a boon, the like I give to you. Give me leave to set my fist to my mouth and whistle 3 blasts thereon." "That will I do," said Robin, "or else I were lacking in courtesy." The friar set his fist to his mouth and put the horn to shame by the piercing whistles he blew, whereupon 100 great dogs came running and jumping so swiftly that they had reached their bank as soon as Robin Hood's men had reached his side. Then followed a rare foolish conflict. Stuteley, Much, Little John, and the other outlaws began sending their arrows whizzing toward the opposite bank, but the dogs, which were taught of the friar, dodged the missiles cleverly and ran and fetched them back again, just as the dogs of today catch sticks. "I have never seen the like of this in my days," cried Little John, amazed. "'Tis rank sorcery and witchcraft." "Take off your dogs, Friar Tuck," shouted Will Scarlet, who had but then run up, and who now stood laughing heartily at the scene. "Friar Tuck!" exclaimed Robin, astounded. "Are you Friar Tuck? Then am I your friend, for you are he I came to seek." "I am but a poor anchorite, a curtall friar," said the other, whistling to his pack. "By name Friar Tuck of Fountain's Dale. For 7 years have I tended the abbey here, preached o' Sundays, and married and christened and buried folk, and fought too if need were, and if it smacks not too much of boasting, I have not yet met the knight or trooper or yeoman that I would yield before. But yours is a stout blade. I would fain know you." "'Tis Robin Hood, the outlaw, who has been assisting you at this christening," said Will Scarlet, glancing roguishly at the 2 opponents' dripping garments. And at this sally the whole band burst into a shout of laughter in which Robin and Friar Tuck joined. "Robin Hood," cried the good friar presently, holding his sides, "are you indeed that famous yeoman? Then I like you well, and had I known you earlier, would have both carried you across and shared my pasty pie with you." "To speak soothly," replied Robin gaily, "'twas the same pie that led me to be rude. Now, therefore, bring it and your dogs and repair with us to the greenwood. We have need of you. With this message came I today to seek you. We will build you a hermitage in Sherwood Forest, and you shall keep us from evil ways. Will you not join our band?" "Marry, that will I," cried Friar Tuck jovially. "Once more will I cross this much beforded stream, and go with you to the good greenwood." So ends chapter 7.